Good morning, everybody. I would like to say it's an amazing opportunity and privilege to be having this conversation about the role of the engineer in a room of this size, and I know it's near and dear to all of our hearts, and really the fundamentals about why we exist, regardless of how your company's mission and vision is, and that is, how do we as a profession continue to add value to the whole AEC industry. So today's topic, our speakers, we're going to be addressing some of our experiences and perspectives, related to how are some of the contracting trends either challenging us or creating opportunities for us as a profession. I would like to say that one of the very fundamental premises of trends, regardless of the market, whether it's in transportation or water or in the vertical markets of a healthcare or commercial offices, one of the very fundamental trends is the contracts, the agreements are written by our clients with the insatiable need to and desire to shift risk. Okay, so risk is always a big topic, about how we position ourselves, how we develop and deliver our practices, and really the way they're shifting risks are really in two fundamental ways. If you start having the conversation, one could be simply just in the contract language. So we've got professions of attorneys writing contracts for owners, and they're really not always intended to be fair. They're intended to shift the risk to the other entities, whether it's us as the engineer, or if we start talking about other delivery methodologies where clients are looking at alternative methods such as design build, our P3s, or even getting into integrated project delivery systems, we'll see where that risk really is being shifted from the owner to another entity. So a big part of the challenge, and it was touched on a little bit yesterday in the conversation, is where is our place in the organization or the team structure when a client is trying to roll out a program? Are we working directly with the client, or are we needing to work through a contractor or a concessionaire? So we're going to touch on some of those topics, but really the question at hand, thinking about our industry, in a way it's a bit of a call to action, right? We listened to Robert O'Neill yesterday talk about some amazing things the SEALs do, and he'd always, he would say that, it's don't be afraid, put fear aside and try to address the issues, right? Don't panic if there's really difficult contract terms, try to address those. Don't try to make reactionary decisions. So early on in the process, whether it's talking to the clients before the RFP or RFQ comes out, reading the language in the RFQ or in the contracts, learning to find ways to mitigate those terms that are difficult to live with. So what we're really trying to do, I guess at the end of the day, is finding our place. So every contract is different. Always remember that we do have a different role based upon the contract arrangements. So, recognize our role and our responsibilities, and making sure that we understand the terms to where we can negotiate the appropriate fees so that we can deliver our practices, and really at the end of the day or the end of the project, to be looked upon as a profession is really adding a lot of value to that whole process. So those are some of the fundamental things that we deal with, I've been involved with, and we're going to hear from our speakers here in a minute. We did, in preparation for today, had a few conference calls, and it was a very open discussion of a lot of different topics, trying to funnel that all into a conversation here today. We did recognize after talking for a little bit amongst ourselves that you could take a lot of the topics of contracting trends or risk and put them into three different buckets. That first bucket, I've mentioned is the risk. So what are those, how is the inherent risk being shifted from the client to us as engineers? The second bucket would be related to contractual language. So what language can we mitigate? Or what language do we just need to put into our scope of services to address those topics? And the third bucket we talked about a lot was the team structure, to really revisit who you're partnering with, what those relationships are, both from a trust standpoint and also just from a business objectives to where it's beneficial to all the parties. So I'm going to have Jeanne start as the first speaker to give some perspectives of her experience in terms of this topic of contracting trends, and so how do we protect the role of the engineer in our industry. So Jeanne, you want to share some of your perspectives?
Sure, thank you, Al. Good morning, everybody. Lochner's been in the design-build alternative delivery market for decades. We started with the Utah work that was established for the Olympics, right? And we've learned over the years that, in the beginning of our foray into a design-build, it was very, very cooperative. It was a team. It was an effort to get a really lot of work done in a very short period of time. But as we continue to see the growth in alternative delivery in various parts of the country, and we're pretty much local to the United States. We've done a little bit of work in Canada and a P3 world, but most of our work is here in the States. We see that the clients in every state are different. The contractors are getting wiser and getting more prescriptive on what they want to do and what they want us to take liability for. And as we've gone through this process, we've put some procedures in place. The first of which is what the industry calls a go, no-go process, what I call a no-go-go process. Because quite honestly, I want to be convinced by my teammates, by my colleagues, that this is the right project for us as a firm, that we've put the right team together, and that we've analyzed risk, not only from the project perspective, but from the contractor's perspective and from the client's perspective. So our go, no-go process involves a two-step. It's an initial go, no-go, whereby they bring the information to us, and the team is made up of a risk manager, myself, I have final say, an authority in alternative delivery in our organization, somebody who's have people who have tremendous experience in alternative delivery, discipline experts, people who are experts in the discipline that we're looking to team on, and somebody who is in the region or the area that has expertise in that region and says, yeah, I think we can win this work. So in the preliminary, we look at who are we looking to team with, what's the probability of the project moving forward, because as we know, alternative delivery fluctuates, right? It's a go, it's a no-go, it's funding, it's not funded, so we look at that. Do we have the people available? Alternative delivery is not for the conventional thinker. It is fast-paced. It is judgments. You're making really strong judgments on what you think is going to happen. So do we have the right people in place? Once we've satisfied that preliminary part, we start looking at finances. What's it going to cost us to pursue it? What's the reward if we win it? And that's a big analysis, because quite honestly, alternative delivery started off as being this panacea for making more money, right? We're finding that it's not true. It's pretty much conventional design, bid, build at a faster pace for a tougher client, quite honestly. Once we get through this phase, we can start talking about teaming agreements. And I'm mentioning two agreements. We have a teaming agreement, we have a contract, and they should be married, they should be linked. But unfortunately what you find is your teaming agreement we tend to do with local staff, local contracting staff, local consulting staff. If we're a sub or if we're a prime, it's prime with the contractor or the concessionaire, if we're a sub with another design firm. Well, we tend to be working locally, right? Because that's where the project is. That's your teaming agreement. And we make all these concessions. We have a contract review. We have legal look at the contract. We try to mitigate our risk with quantities. We won't take risk for quantities. We put limits of liabilities in place. We try not to link ourselves to schedule. So there's a lot of things we look at. Now we win the job. And that's when you start talking about the contract. And even though we've had preliminary discussions about the contract, it usually takes until you win the job or you're really close to selection where you really start hammering out the details. What's the problem with that contract? That tends to come from corporate, which is in a different part of the country or a different has a different goal in mind. And we many times see that that contract comes through ignoring all of the agreements we've made in this teaming agreement. So there's a very strong effort on Lochner's part to watch that very closely and to make sure that there's a buy-in. How do we protect ourselves from that? One of the things we put in all of our teaming agreements is a walkaway clause. And that clause basically says, if we get to the project and we're awarded and we can't come to agreement on the contracts, the contract language, we're walking. And that's imperative for us because again, these as you said, Al, the contractors, the owners are giving risk to the contractors are doing their best to make sure we own some of that risk. But really, we're not without reaping that reward. So we're very cautious about making sure we have all those steps in place. Execution of the contract comes with a totally different animal. I would tell you that our project managers are accustomed to working for conventional clients. You negotiate, you define a scope, you negotiate that scope. Your contract's pretty fair, and you proceed. In design build, what we find is our project managers also have to be contract managers. They have to understand that contract in detail, and they have to make sure we adhere to every letter of that law, of that contract. And for the really magnificent projects, the billion-dollar projects, the multi-million-dollar projects, we have to make sure, in many cases, to put a contract manager teamed with our project manager because he's busy or she's busy doing the management of the project. We need somebody who's making sure that we're following the guidelines of the contract. One of the methods that I think the industry should look at, and one of the things that we're looking at is setting up a parameter at the beginning of the contract that says to the contractor, you will deal with this person. They are responsible for linking us to this contract. And anything that you can't go to other individuals in the organization to get action. They're designers, they're technicians, but they cannot link us to a contract. That's critical because you can find yourself having an engineer, and I'll use quantity as an example, where we don't take quantity risk, but you can have a designer be pulled by a client, a contractor, staff member and say, hey, can you just run this quantity for me? You want to make sure that running that quantity didn't link you to quantity risk. So there's a lot of parameters and a lot of associations with that contract that you have to link to the delivery of your contract, of your product. And that's different in our world. So when we look at this, we make sure that we have that right arm, if you will, depending on the size, that makes sure that what we've signed up for, that's what we're going to deliver. Those are some of the things we've put into place to date.
Thank you. Good comments. Michel, you want to share some of your comments and perspectives?
Sure. And I would first like to thank Dave and Sergio for inviting me, welcoming to this conference. Indeed, what I would like to bring is our views and experience in the old Europe that we've had on PPPs and design and build environment. They have been around for a decade, as you say. For example, the Channel Tunnel between France and England was designed by Setec, by my company. That's in the late 80s, and it was constructed in the beginning of the 90s. And that was in a design and build environment. Why was that? Because the construction methods were so intricate with the design that it has to be that way. And gradually we had more and more design and build and PPPs around, and it took a huge surge in 2007 with a new law. And we have to understand why. There are actually three main reasons for which they developed so much in France. The first reason is, it might not be a good reason. It's a question of public financing, public funding. If the public funds are empty, then it's an easy way to pass the word to the private sector and say, why don't you fund this? But why would a private firm be eligible to better rates than the government? That's a question that we should ask. So I don't think it's the right reason. The second reason is ownership. It's a business. It's a discipline. You have to be a good owner to have a good project. And in France, we had a very strong administrative engineering, something very, very similar to the Corps of Engineers that you have in the States. But that disappeared in 20 years because the government passed the buck to local administration, municipalities, and the administrative part, which the technical part of the administration disappeared in 20 years. And that's an issue because the government was not able to be the owner of very large complex projects anymore. And that's true for roads, that's true for railways, and for a few other things. The third reason is the speed. As you mentioned, these projects go very fast. Once the project has been awarded, before it takes time to award a large contract in PPPs or design and build. It takes time. For example, railway project took 1.5 years or 2 years to be awarded. And we've had three of them actually in France, one concession, two PPPs. And they came after two other projects in railway, high-speed lines. They're all between 200 and 300 kilometers long. There were 5 of them in France. 2 of them were built in a conventional way, and 3 of them were built either in concession or PPP. And I would like to bring just one slide to focus on what is important, what's the difference between a conventional contract and a design and PPP. Where are the risks? What are risks that are transferred? For the first thing, it's a fast delivery project. So again, once the project has been awarded, it goes very fast. And there are milestones, there are important milestones for the environmental issues, for land ownership that you can't miss. And that's an issue that we engineers have to point out. So we have to be very careful. And that's in the interest of the project, that's in the interest of the team, design and build team, that we respect these milestones. And as you mentioned, Jeanne, or Jeanne, it's a French name, by the way. We don't want to take responsibilities for quantities, cost, and performance. But sometimes you have to. Performance, as we will see in the next slide, is a key issue, particularly in the railway business, because it's safety implied. Nuclear business, railway business, they all imply safety issues that you can't miss, and we have a key role to play in this. Contractors don't know how to handle this. That's my point of view. All right. So you have to be cautious with taking risk on quantities, in particular in the bidding phase, because the contractor will want to push you. Why don't you give me this quantity so that I can price the thing? And that's very risky, because if you do this and because it's a short period of time and you miss something in the quantities, then of course you're responsible for this. You're liable for this, and that can take you very far. In the design development process, well, what I would suggest is not only take this as a risk, but there are also opportunities. And the opportunities that we can place in a design and build environment is that you can have incentives in economies that you can make. But I'm realistic. It's a fast-track process, so it's very hard to make economy savings on quantities when you're developing the project. Of course, you have to cap your fees, the risk that you take on a certain amount of your fees. It cannot be unlimited. And I don't know how things work here, but that's just something that you should be very aware of in France. All right, and I would like to just skip the point before the last and focus on integration, testing, and commission. Again, for a railway business, it's a highly risky business. Because it concerns safety. When you have trains running at 300, 320 kilometers per hour, you cannot miss anything. And everything is intricated. Signaling, alignment, earthworks, bridges, the locations of bridges, the behavior, the dynamic behavior of bridges, all this is intricated. And one of the key role that the engineering companies can play in a design and build or PPP environment is to put that together and make sure that you comply with the expected performance that the client gave you. So how does it work? You're probably familiar with this V-shaped integrated project delivery type of design. The green, I won't go into the details, but on the left-hand side you have the project definition, what are the performance requirements in the first place, then the project definition, project design, detailed design, and then at the bottom you have the construction work. And as you go up on the right side, you have you put things together, you test things, you supervise the construction, you test things, and you have the commissioning on the top. And you check the safety requirements. The green line here is the perimeter of the contract, the PPP contract. And everything inside is integrated, and that's a key role that the engineering community can play. And I think it's an opportunity, a new opportunity that we didn't have before. So if I go down, oh, I can't go down, but that's okay. All right. Too bad. That's fine.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry about that. That's for next time.
Is that good? All right, thank you, Miguel. One of the things when you think about the contracting trends with the various alternative methods, I think it's important. I mentioned earlier about the team structure and what's the role of the project manager. So when we think about, how do we protect ourselves as an engineer of record, both contractually and adding value to the whole process, you think about when you're on a design build, for example, the pass-through for all the risk is you may be the engineer of record, you're responsible for all the sub-consultants. And a lot of times, as fast as these projects go, well before you're done with your design, there's packages being sent out by specialized subcontractors, and oftentimes those are selected or influenced by the owner and the contractor, but they still fall under your terms of your contract for responsibility. So there is a bit of a challenge there in terms of how you really manage beyond just a traditional design bid build. So that's a point I think really needs to be looked at individually by the projects. And when you couple that with the comment about speed to market, the clients that are not just, when they're shifting risk, it is risk in terms of cost, but it's also risk that they want to get to market sooner. So the risk of pushing the schedule to where when they make a decision, you negotiate your contract. I would imagine everybody in here has had that feeling of why did it take 5 or 6 months to get this contract negotiated, and you want me to get all this design done in 8 months that would usually take a year and a half. So we spend a lot of time doing that. So where is this all leading? Well, as the project manager, particularly when you get into alternative delivery processes, the client is expecting to deliver things quicker, and the contracting community through the DBIA or different sources or even Excel Catlin, you'll see information that says to a client you can deliver up to 33% faster if you go through alternative delivery and do your contracting methodology. So telling the clients this is a great thing, you can shift the risk and get this thing done quicker. And it's probably not a surprise then that from a claim standpoint, the largest claim is usually related to communications, right? Things are happening so fast, you find yourself as the project manager, not just in terms of things that you're normally familiar with, but things you may not be familiar with a lot of specialty subcontractors. So any thoughts you may want to share on that in terms of your project managers and those arrangements, beyond from a contractual standpoint of expanding their role for broadening, beyond just what you're really good at in terms of consultants?
There's a couple of things that we consider. First of all, your project manager has to have discipline leads, and those discipline leads should, regardless of who they work for, report strictly to the project manager. It means our project manager, your project manager, if you're the design lead, has to have complete authority and accountability for the technical leads. Some of the things that we look for, if it's something really outside of our wheelhouse, Lochner doesn't do architectural work, for example, we sometimes try to get the contractor to negotiate, have a contract specifically with that entity. Doesn't always work, I will share that with you. But the second step to assure your comfort is making sure that you roll down that insurance liability. So if there's a limit of liability on the contract, which is something that we do, we strongly enforce a limit of liability, and then we insure for it to protect ourselves. So whatever that liability may be, and for smaller jobs, the percent's higher. For the bigger jobs, hopefully the percent's someplace where we're really comfortable and then we insure for it. But with your sub-consultants, you make sure they can be insured for the amount that you need. We've run into situations where we'll get a project-specific insurance liability, and then we'll find out that a sub-consultant's insurance will not insure them if there's a project-specific insurance policy. So you have to know the legalities of the insurance industry now, right? You have to have an insurance expert. These are the things that we look at very closely. Regardless of what happens, if you're the prime, they're coming to you first. We know this. It happens all the time. So making sure insurance is placed, making sure you understand the insurance ramifications. We all work with minority firms. Those minority firms tend not to be able to get the insurance that we need, and recognizing that your firm is going to be held accountable for that. Those are the risks that you face, and as a firm, you have to decide, is it worth the risk, or do I look for a different firm? Is it worth the risk, or do I, and I have the best person? So those are, as long as you understand your risk, you can kind of mitigate it, and you can kind of realize where you're willing to take that tolerance hold.
Good comments. Michael, could you expand a little bit more on, you're having a discussion about the integration of a lot of different parties and the complexity of agreements. Could you share with us any suggestions you have of what might work well in terms of those arrangements, or it could be a win-win or some kind of a better balance in terms of responsibilities and outcomes?
Sure. But at first I would challenge the fact that it goes faster. That really depends. That really depends. As I said, we've had 5 high-speed lines, railway lines in France, and the first 2 were in with a conventional process. That is, with engineering, design, and then construction contracts that were taken over afterwards. And if we compare that with the global time that it took for the PPPs to run on similar lengths of projects, similar projects, well, the time that you save, and it is true, it is going really fast as soon as the project is awarded, but it takes about 2 years to award the project. So if you really need to put that together and see if it's really worthwhile. So this is not the only reason. It's often a bad reason which is advanced by clients. I want to do that very quickly, so let's do a PPP or let's do a design and build. Sometimes it works, but sometimes it doesn't work. And one key issue is to have, for the owner, is to have a fixed program. And the owner must not change his mind. If he changes his mind in a PPP or in design and build environment, he's dead. And it will cost him a lot. But if he doesn't change his mind, then the program is fixed, and then all the responsibility lies in the PPP contractor. So if we're dealing with organization, oops, sorry. Can I have this? If you can put the slides. 1. This is, I'm going to take again that example of the railway line in Brittany. So it's 200 kilometers. And one thing is you have to keep it fairly simple. If it's too intricate, then it doesn't work. Keep it simple. So on the top of the slide, you see the client. That's the railway authority in France, called the AFF. Used to be AFS, now it's called SNCF. The red box is the contract, the PPP contract. It's in red because it's dangerous. And there's plenty of room for engineering companies. You have plenty of assistants. You have independent checkers. You have people who check the safety checker. You have people who make sure that the performance are well achieved, in particularly in the operation with the operation aspects. And on the bottom, you have the PPP contractor. It has a name. It's called Eiffage. It's the name of the constructor company. But in fact, there is embedded in it an ownership team, a construction team, and an operation team. These are the names for 3, Ire, Claire, and Opere. If you go into a little more details, And this is where we were. That's the red box, the design and build contractor. But it's a design and build contractor within the PPP contract. And all contracts, PPP contracts, advisors, design and build, all were signed at the same time. It's not one global contract, it's in fact 16 contracts that were signed the same night. It took the whole night to sign them. So this is a simplified version of how it works in the design and build environment. So that's the design team, all right? It's more a project management and design team. The top blue box is an integrated team. I say integrated because it's 30% contractor. The contractor has to lead because it takes all the responsibilities, all the liabilities are with him. So if a decision has to be made, the contractor has to make the decision. Of course, there's plenty of people from our team who advise him. That's why there's 70% engineering firm. That was a team of about 50 people. Rather simple, all located in the same place. The important thing is it has to be totally integrated. Otherwise, it doesn't work. Of course, you can share the job afterwards. And that's what's in the pink box on the bottom left. This is where we are. This is where we made money, by the way. On top, it's hourly rates are used. So it's per the hour. And that's a blue box. And the pink box is lump sum. So that's your responsibility to develop the project. And you can develop the project, you can actually split the project. That's an issue, there's many people around, so you have to split the work. So on a railway line, which is 200 kilometers, you can split geographically, that's easy. At least for the civil works. When it comes to equipment, I mean, I'm talking catenaries, I'm talking power lines, I'm talking signaling, which are important things that cannot be split. It's impossible to split that. That's obviously in an integrated team. But that can also come in the pink box, and some integration, and most of the integration actually, is in the blue box. The yellow box is a contractor, and the contractor can come with ideas. Oh, I know how to do that better, because I have, for example, I can precast things. I don't need to pour that on the site. I can precast the most part of the bridges, bring that on the site, and that's going to be faster. That's a good idea, but we have to integrate that into our design. That's the loop that we need to have in a design and build environment. So the pink and the yellow box are really the design and build team. On top of that, you need, that's an absolute, you need the project management team that will define the program inside our contract, that will define what to do, spread the job, check the job, and make sure that every decision is tracked and every decision is motivated.
Thank you. I'm going to do something a little different, and that is I'm going to reach out to the audience. We have a lot of brain power in this room, a lot of experience in this room, and ask you, does anybody, before we get into the question and answer session, does anybody have any examples or testimonials of on this topic of contracting trends, things you're seeing, things that you may be addressing that's helping the role or protecting the role of the engineer in your contracts?
At least
Anybody?
for those who survived.
Turn the lights up a little bit, see if people, any takers on that? Anything from a standpoint of contract language, risk, teaming arrangements? Okay, so we can go into, why don't we go into the Q&A session. Anybody have any questions? Lively group, used them all up yesterday.
Don't-
Do we have one?
It's, I guess, more looking at the future of design build. From New York, we have design build in certain public projects. When it first started, we heard that engineers needed to be really careful, that the contractors were going to eat our lunch. We're going to be, pursuing 5 short list means that unless you start winning a bunch of them, you're going to lose money. Now we're starting to hear from the other side that the contractors are having the same concern, that it's really difficult to pursue. it's really hard to make money in the long run, because unless you start getting selected, you're going to choose not to pursue things in the long run. Is design build going to end up, do you think design build is going to end up with just a few folks staying in that market and it's going to be able to sustain itself? Or is it going to be something where firms are starting to get out of it, and the market's going to force public owners primarily to start changing the way that they look at things?
I think design build's here to stay. It's a tool in the toolbox. There are consultants that are getting out of the development side, the design side, and going to owner side. Less risk, less costly to pursue. But there's still a very big push to find alternative ways to deliver projects, and design build P3 is one of them. The big firms, the mega firms, many times can become an equity partner. They don't always want to, but they can be. And as a result, the rewards are higher. So there's that leg. But I don't foresee it going away. I do foresee some firms saying it's not for me. We're very cautious on the type of projects we will go after. We want to stay within a certain size project. We want to stay away from, we look at contractors. If they're litigious, we kind of say, yeah, we really don't want to team with you. And we look at teaming partners who understand design build, because there is so much risk. But that's part of that financial analysis that we do. Is it, what's the cost to go after it? What are we giving up to go after it? That's another analysis that we do. We have people working on a job that we likely will have to take off that job to put on a design build pursuit. And what's that cost? And are we going to be able to recoup it in another way? And then what's the reward of the win? Listen, I think your go, no go has to be very, very tedious, focused, to make sure you're making the right decision. Because a design build job is going to stretch your employees beyond what they're normally used to being stretched on, working tremendous amount of hours, 6 and 7 days a week, making decisions without having all the knowledge, because you have to make decisions. Your engineers, you go to a level that you feel comfortable and go, yep, that's what we're going to do. Working with contractors who have we're gentlemanly, right? Or we're ladylike, right? We're kind. We want to do what's right. We're very ethical. And I'm not suggesting contractors aren't ethical, but they're out there to get the job done, to construct. It's a different mindset. Working in that environment can be very harsh. But I do believe design build's here to stay. The United States is having a struggle with P3. We don't see that a lot. I know it's being pushed by Washington now. We'll see if that happens. The P3 market will add another layer with the concessionaire. And that's gonna add a whole new entity to our world, where now you're not only working for the designer's answering to a concessionaire who's answering to a client. They're going to be 3, 4 stages removed. It's going to be a different world, and it's something we have to prepare to plan.
I would add to that surely it will continue to have a bigger part of our delivery, and the design build as a trend going forward. From our standpoint of looking at how do we make a go, no-go decision, I'd also say you need to have that same diligence of that contractor that calls you to say to be on their team, to really vet it out and see if they really have the best chance and who the competitors are, the other contractors. As good as we are and as good as we can promote ourselves as the engineer of record, the design build still favors heavily in the selection process of who that builder is. So it's important to have that right teaming partner that makes sense. And it's not always the same teaming partner. It comes down to who on that contractor side, who's their project manager, superintendent, who's going to drive it, and have they done it before, and get our folks aligned with their folks to have the best, the value proposition of the client. And I would like to say too, the term of design build, we have 7 markets in our firm. There's some markets where a lot of people are familiar with, where you have that design build proposal, where as the engineer of record, you're doing design at risk in terms of the amount of labor that you put in and the amount of effort you put in. I think the key thing is there on the relationship with the contractor, you aren't necessarily going to win the first or only project you submit, but having a relationship with a contractor where it's more strategic and say that together, collectively, you're going to pursue maybe 3 projects of a certain sector to where you can win and you may lose some, but win and lose together as a team. I think there's more buy-in from the contractor standpoint. So I think that's something that you could consider doing. The other part is in one of our markets, in the aviation market, a lot of the design build, or actually most of the design build that we're involved with, already has bridging documents. So there's no design at risk on that. And I think the clients there, although it's a quality-based selection, they're starting to look at saying that'll be the majority of the scoring, and then cost will be some factor, but not nearly as much as the qualification. So, you know, depending on where your level of risk is, I think trying to be specific about where you want to play in that world of the design build is important, and not try to just pursue too many different things, kind of going back to do your go, no go, or, you know, just as diligently on with the contractor and your teaming partners as you do if you were going to submit just directly to a client. Satch?
Can you give a little dialogue on the difference between design build for industry and design build for public entities? We find that to be, we find the atmosphere to be completely different.
I can take that one. We've had experience with Airbus, for example, on the design and build of final assembly lines. We almost had that, the one in Mobile, Alabama, but we're mostly working in France. Thing is, with private clients, they want to go really fast. I mean, building a building is just one tool in the construction of an airplane. It's just a tool. And so the decision is taken very lately, because the green light for once the program is launched for an aircraft company comes very late, and then everything has to go very fast. So in a way, design and build is the only way to proceed. But you have to be very flexible, very flexible. For one thing, the design and build is launched or using only a preliminary design. Whereas in the railway business that I showed to you, it was launched after part of the project was already done, once the owner really knew what he wanted to do. But it's in the private industry, industrial facilities, it's so intricated, the building is so intricated with the process of constructing the aircraft that it has to be a loop. So the building is launched with very preliminary design, the construction starts, and you refine the design as the process goes. So that's very different, a lot more flexibility in the contract as well. That a final and assembly line is worth $100 million, roughly. One aircraft is $100 million, and they sell by the thousands. So the important issue is to have the facility delivered on time, and that it works for the final process that the aircraft industry is going to put inside. So more flexibility for sure.
Yes, on a P3, when the contractor is not the financing entity and there's a separate financial player, what has been your relationship, if any, with that entity? And if you've had a relationship with them, how does it help you mitigate your risks?
Can you repeat the second part of that question? I didn't hear you.
If there is a separate entity from the contractor doing the financing of a P3, what has been your relationship development with that financing entity, not the contractor? And if you've had that opportunity, how has it mitigated your risk?
We've not had a tremendous amount of P3 work. The one project that we had a P3 was in Canada, and we were sub to a larger firm. We were doing a development in the Carolinas for a concessionaire, and we had ongoing relationships with the concessionaire, but it's predominantly with the constructor, because, you know, that's the designer, right? You're being hired with the constructor. It's kind of like what Michel said is the concessionaire's here, the design team is here, the design build team is here. So you are talking with respect to goals and expectations and having decision-making, but the concessionaire tends to be at a higher level working directly with the contractor, from my knowledge. Michel probably faces different things with what he faces, and probably you too.
Yeah, I would say just a few, I guess from my experience, just being involved in a couple P3s. You know, I would say that, you know, working for the finance side of the concessionaire tends to be more, or gives us the opportunity as an engineer to be more of a trusted advisor, to help really more on the concepts, the front-end planning, and I think our services are valued more in a think tank or de-thinking with them about how they can really evaluate a project and look at some different alternatives. And I think when you go to I'm going to say it's an extreme, when you get to the part of being on the contractor side, and I've only had a few experiences, and it's always been a very commoditized feeling, even to the point where, you know, if you kind of think about what you're trying to do as an organization, are your employees really up for that task? You know, if you're trying to negotiate a contract and your employees feel they're being commoditized, and do they really want to go through this grind? I'm not sure that's, you know, I don't think you can just jump into a P3. So I think, you know, being understanding about what your employees, even though technically they can do it, they may not enjoy it at all. It may not be a good experience. So those are the two kind of bookends of experiences I've had with that.
And I would elaborate on that and answer that depends. If you're a designer, then you're below the red box. You know, remember the dangerous box, that you don't have access to the client, you don't have to have access to the lenders. But there are many other options for engineering companies. You can be independent checker, you can be LTA, lender's technical advisor, and then of course you're in direct contact with the lenders, and you would advise them and give a different opinion of what's going on below the red box.
Okay, we have any other, you want to make some final comments before we wrap up? Anything maybe we didn't get a chance to say that you want to share with the audience?
I
Jeanne?
could say that I think design build is an exciting area. It's a risky area, but if you have staff that are genuinely interested and have the mentality of that contractor approach, get things done quickly, and they're talented. It's a line of work that many want to get into. We see that. We have individuals in our organization who strictly want to do design build because they're seeing what they're designing get produced quickly, right? You design bid build, you design, it sits on somebody's shelf for a while, eventually it gets constructed. You might retire by the time it's done, depending on how big of a priority it is. In design build, you're actively involved with that which you're designing. You're going out in the field, you're answering questions. So it's a different world, but it's an enticing world, and it's an exciting world, and I think it's a place to be. Just do it very cautiously because it is litigious.
I totally agree with that. You may consider design and build as a threat because you're well used to a conventional way of doing business. But that's an exciting way of doing the same business differently. And for young engineers from the millennium age, then that's also very exciting because they can have access to what's going on the construction site. They understand better what's going on, why the conflicts that may arise for a certain type of design. They don't want to design too strictly if that cannot be built. That's an enormous education process to see immediately what you design being built and have that feedback. And that's very exciting for our young engineers, and besides, they don't get too dirty because they don't go on the site too often.
I would say too, generally speaking, you know, risk shifting to us as the engineer of record. One of the phrases that always intrigues me is the one where a client will say that you can't rely upon any of the information they provide to you. Okay, So
Yes.
it's quite a quandary. But in reality, I think having a little deeper dive into that conversation beyond them just shifting the risk, what do they really mean by that? Identifying that to where you can put that in your scope. So if it's because their documents, they're not confident with their documents are right, then make sure that there's enough scope in your contract to go revalidate, survey, whatever you have to do to mitigate that challenge. So again, the risks, I think it's important to identify early, even before the RFP comes out, when the RFP comes out again, and then with the contract language, and making sure that with the risk mitigation, we negotiate the right fees, that right value to have that place in this industry, as an engineer of record. So don't, as Robert O'Neill said, don't be afraid, don't be fearful, don't be stressed, just work through it. So
And don't quit.
don't quit. That's right.
You
Yeah.
can't quit.
Yeah, so if someone can be thrown into a 15-foot deep of water with their hands and ankles tied, I'm sure we can kind of work through this as an industry, and we'll figure it out. So if you will, thanks for listening, and
Thank you.
please thank our speakers here today.